Hi, my name is Lauren Pratt, and this is the midterm for Psych 516. Question 1 reads, how have recent historical events affected the course of research in organizational psychology? Give an example of an event and the resulting outcome. With this topic, our book has given several examples of ways that historical events affected the direction that research took with industrial organizational psychology. One example is simply the aging of the baby boomer generation. And this large group of people in society has been getting up to the age where they're leaving the workforce. So naturally, more research is focused on that transitional period and how that affects people and the psychology going into it. Additionally, the economic recession of 2008 brought about more research on unemployment and job security and just the effect that an uncertain future can have on employees with their employers. Additionally, the election of President Obama as the first Black president brought about an increased awareness of diversity and sensitivity in the workplace, and research focused a great deal more on that. But one example that I would like to present that wasn't in the book is the legalization of gay marriage that occurred in 2014. With this huge monumental change in our laws, there was a mainstream acceptance of gay marriage and sexual minorities as a whole. But there's a gap, though, between perhaps certain people's opinions of that versus the legal opinion of gay marriage. So that 2014 Supreme Court decision has brought about a great deal more research on the discrimination and harassment that can occur in the workplace towards sexual minorities. And one article from Industrial Organizational Psychology that was published in 2017 specifically focuses on workplace discrimination and in particular the subtleties that can occur because discrimination can be either systemic, an organization as a whole can be set up so that it puts sexual minorities at a disadvantage, or it can happen interpersonally between employees, supervisors, and just on the individual basis. Discrimination in that way can be subtle and overt, and there's been more research on who should take onus in combating that kind of discrimination. Should it be at the lowest level of peers and supervision, or should it fall to the higher scales or the higher levels of the organization? And just research on how to best handle reports, how to best identify and address and essentially monitor behavior that deals with discrimination, be it gender, race, or with sexual minorities. Question 2. Describe the socialization process for graduate students in your program. Is the program successful in socializing newcomers and creating job embeddedness? So first, for answering this question, it's important to have a grasp of what is the socialization process for an organization. And as we reviewed, the 6 dimensions of this process are the teaching the newcomer to the new member as they become an insider, is teaching them the history of the organization, the unique language and terminology used by that organization, the politics and unwritten rules of that organization, people, and introducing the new member to other individuals and helping them build relationships, teaching them about the organizational goals and values, or what makes the organization tick, what drives it, what does it believe in, what is it trying to strive for. And the last dimension is performance proficiency, or what does the new member have to do in order to perform their job to the level of expectation that is set for them. So when it comes to Liberty Online, I believe that the socialization process does touch on several of these dimensions, but I would not say that it accomplishes all of them successfully. So the first dimension, history. While the history of Liberty is available online through the website for students, it is not explicitly discussed as part of the online program. I don't recall anything from my registration process or anything that was very intentional about discussing Liberty's history, or background explicitly in that regard. And I did have background on the college just from general knowledge, but as far as the socialization process, I don't believe that that was accomplished extremely successfully. Secondly is language, and again, I would say that this is another dimension that was not explicitly covered. And granted, Liberty University being a Christian institution might use certain terminology that individuals from non-Christian circles might not be familiar with. So someone coming in that could hamper the socialization process if they weren't really entirely certain of any kind of Christian terminology specifically. Politics. Unfortunately, again, I would have to say both not discussed very explicitly, um, and, but perhaps also not extremely applicable for the online program. The unwritten rules for Liberty Online is not, because it's so atypical, it's not an actual organization where people are interacting face to face and in the same space and sharing the same office area. The type of unwritten rules aren't quite the same as what you might expect in a typical workplace. But the next dimension, however, people. Liberty, I believe, does do a good job of allowing opportunities for people to connect through Yammer and the chat boards for both departments and the school as a whole, and geographical locations the students are attending from. And through these chat boards, people might be able to better get a grasp on the politics of Liberty or the language that is used or things like that. When it comes to goals and values, I believe that this is definitely covered through the socialization process of Liberty, where students are, expected to read through student expectations and also the values and goals of Liberty in its education of Christian students is part of the checklist quiz that we must affirm and identify the goals of the organization. And finally, proficiency, I think, is another area that the school does well in covering the grading instructions and rubrics and how to perform satisfactory in all of the grading of assignments. So all that being said, I believe that the socialization process at Liberty is a great deal left up to the student and how involved they want to be, how embedded they want to become. Some students might dig in and really connect with classmates, while others might prefer and choose to remain in the background with no true sense of community or attachment. Question 3 from Chapter 4. How can an organization reduce or prevent work-family conflict? Again, with this question, I believe that it is important to understand what work-family conflict is. And this is, even if the terminology is not known, this is a very common conflict that virtually every employee is going to face at one point or another. And this is when the demands of work interfere with the demands of your personal life or your family life at home. There's 3 categories of this type of conflict, and one is strain-based, the second is time-based, and the third is behavior-based. And with strain-based, it's when the stress or pressure from either your work or your home carries over into the other. So that could be the stress at home of maybe a conflict with your spouse distracts you and prevents you from performing your best at work, or when stress from work comes home and you're in a bad mood and you are short with your family or you are unable to perform some sort of responsibility you might have around the house because of that. Time-based is simply you cannot be in 2 places at once. So either work is preventing you from being with your family for a specific time or event, or when a family demand prevents you from being at work, such as having to take a family member to a doctor's appointment or something of that nature. Behavior-based is when your persona either at work affects your home life. So I think of a drill sergeant in the military going home and then having the same kind of strictness and harshness with their family, or when your family role affects your work performance. So given that same example, it could be a parent who is gentle with their children comes to work as a drill sergeant and is perhaps not as strict as they ought to be with new recruits. Now, to reduce work-family conflict, organizations can offer several benefits, such as on-site childcare or on-site workout facilities, flex time, telecommuting, job sharing. These are all examples given by the text, but research has shown that the single most effective factor in reducing work-family conflict is allowing employees to have schedule control. So allowing them to have the flexibility to determine the hours they work, and that does include the example from before as of having flex time, or even being able to swap shifts with another employee to deconflict demands that you might have outside of work. Additionally, if employees do have control over their schedule, being in a results-only work environment is also very beneficial in this regard, because the focus is not on the minutia of the time you check in, the time you check out, but it's only on the results. So if someone is able to accomplish the work that is required of them, then that is where the focus is, not on whether they did it from home, whether they're teleconferencing or figuring out flexibility in their schedule in other ways. And additionally, simply having supportive supervisors who perpetuate the culture of family-friendly workspaces, because there can be all of these benefits in place, but if the culture at work is one that people look down on a coworker if they take extra time off, or if they're not in the office when everyone else is, then that's a real detriment and can cause people to not take advantage of those benefits, and therefore they become useless in trying to deconflict the demands of both work and home life. Question 4 from Chapter 5. Imagine you have been asked to develop a performance assessment program for employee development. What techniques could you use to adequately evaluate employee performance as comprehensively as possible? So when it comes to job performance, this of course encompasses all of the behaviors that an employee engages in while at work, is the textbook definition of job performance. This involves all of their effectiveness, productivity, efficiency, and utility is how our text breaks it down. And there's a couple different schools of thought when it comes to evaluating work performance. One was the Murphy technique, or the Murphy list rather, and this includes task-oriented behaviors, interpersonally oriented behaviors, downtime behaviors, and destructive or hazardous behaviors. But if I were creating a program, I would actually lean more towards the Campbell model that focuses both on in-role performance and extra-role performance. But to me, it seems a bit more comprehensive than the Murphy list. Campbell's list includes in-role performance with the categories of job-specific task proficiency, as well as non-job specific task proficiency, and then several extra role performance categories such as written and oral communication, demonstrating effort, maintaining personal discipline, facilitating peer and team performance, supervision or leadership, and management and administration. So these are quite a few categories that are applicable to pretty much any job that one might have. And I would focus on these both because, of course, what person's job description and job duties that they were hired to perform are incredibly important to measure, but also what makes a good employee and someone who is a high performer beyond simply the black and white of their job description is the extra role performance of how they are as a coworker, how they are as an employee. And many of those are almost intangibles, but I think that they can be measured. I would keep my system similar to what I've become used to in the military, with each category of what is important to the organization. So a category specifically for job performance, where we could evaluate the duties that the employee is expected to perform, and a rating scale of how successfully that employee has performed them. And then moving on to the different categories that Campbell listed out, such as their communication abilities, or how well they are able to do that. And with those Likert type scale measurements, it wouldn't be just a simple 1 to 5 like the military does, but I would use descriptive anchor points or behavioral anchor points, what our textbook references. So instead of saying this person is able to communicate effectively through both written and orally, 1 being not at all, 5 being yes, it would have the anchor points being that they, number 1, they communicate ineffectively and are difficult to understand, versus a rating of 5, the best, being they have superior communication with grammar, spelling, syntax, and are able to communicate their ideas thoroughly and effectively with no question. So I would come through, it would take a great deal of time, it would be a very long process, but when it comes to evaluating employees, taking the time to develop such a measurement would help both the employee know what's expected of them and the employer to minimize the variance between, or rather to increase the variance between employees, to show who truly is performing at a high level and who might not be. And having the multi-dimensional approach would help capture the employee as a whole and not just in one area. Question 5 from Chapter 6. What are some possible common organizational constraints? How could they lead to counterproductive behaviors? So again, first, understanding what counterproductive behaviors are. These are any volitional acts that harm or are intended to harm organizations or people in organizations. So any kind of behavior that you can imagine that is harmful to the people and coworkers in a place, or the organization itself financially or reputationally, etc. Different thoughts categorize these different ways. Spector's 5-factor model, for example, includes production deviance, sabotage, theft, withdrawal, and abuse of others as the 5 main categories of counterproductive work behaviors. Others get a bit more nitty-gritty, more detailed, such as breaking it down to theft, destruction of property, misuse of information, misuse of time and resources, unsafe behavior, poor attendance, poor quality work, alcohol use, drug use, and inappropriate verbal and physical actions. So you can get down very detailed, but ultimately all of these are going to fall under Spector's 5-factor model and those categories there. So these types of behaviors, what I could determine that 3 common organizational constraints which might lead to some of these behaviors are 1, manning and accountability, secondly, lack of diversity, and the third are wages. So when it comes to manning and accountability, this is something that I've seen firsthand. When there's low manning or the manning is spread out, the amount of accountability for the employees reduces drastically. This can and does often lead to absenteeism when there's a lack of absence control policies, or basically people just not taking accountability for which employees are there when they're supposed to be. So people slip through the cracks and start to fade away because they know that no one will notice and there will be no consequence. So with the thin manning and the lack of accountability, you get people drifting away and withdrawing from the workplace. Secondly, the lack of diversity. When a workplace is made up of primarily one single race or one single gender or one single age group, either intentionally or incidentally, that homogeny of the group can lead to what would fall under the category of abuse of others. So it could lead to discrimination and incivility if there is a minority employee that comes in, whether it be a female working in an all-male work environment or vice versa. It could be racial minority or a sexual minority in a workplace. So the greater the homogeny, the greater the increased risk for behavior and actions that would fall under abuse of others. And finally, wages. The research that we've read about indicates that There is a direct correlation between lower wages and increased theft that can occur. The example was given in convenience stores, but I imagine any type of organization that has products either for sale or even simply office supplies. When there is a sense of injustice or a person feeling that they are not being compensated properly, there's an increased risk that they will engage in theft, which is a damaging behavior to the organization. And so with these three constraints, I think these are the most common and most likely to result in the harmful, counterproductive workplace behaviors.